My name is Liana Prescott. I'm 28 years old, and for the last 3 years, I have lived a life entirely separate from the one my family believes I have. In the Prescott household, a world of Boston Brahmin tradition and inherited wealth, a life's value is calculated not by the happiness it brings, but by the legacy it upholds. At our tense, biannual family dinners, my Aunt Cordelia's words, sharp as the winter wind off the Charles River, would often find their mark. "Still finding yourself, dear?" she would inquire, her tone a delicate blend of pity and condescension. "It's a long journey for some, I suppose." What my family couldn't possibly know was that my journey had already led me to a destination beyond their wildest, most traditional imaginings. Before I share the moment the rarefied air of our Beacon Hill dining room was shattered by the sight of my face on the cover of Forbes, I'd love for you to share in the comments what dream you're nurturing in secret. And if you've ever felt like the black sheep in a flock that only values shades of white, perhaps you'll find a piece of your own story in mine. The Prescotts are not merely a family, they are a Boston institution. Prescott and Finch, the wealth management firm my great-grandfather founded, has been a quiet pillar of State Street since the early 20th century. My grandfather, Julian Prescott, didn't transform it with aggressive tactics, but solidified its reputation for unbreachable discretion and old-world wisdom. Our family home, a stately brick townhouse on Louisburg Square, is a testament to this philosophy, a museum of quiet power, filled with ancestral portraits and the scent of lemon oil and old paper. Growing up, I learned that being a Prescott meant walking a path paved with herringbone and granite. A girl's education at Windsor was followed by a women's college, like Wellesley or Smith, and then a suitable marriage or a respectable, quiet career, perhaps in art history or philanthropy. For the men, it was Buckingham, Brown, and Nichols, then Harvard, and finally, a somber-suited position at Prescott and Finch. My parents, Helen and Edward Prescott, were the perfect curators of this tradition. My mother, with her timeless pearls and dedication to the Boston Symphony Orchestra's fundraising committee, embodied the grace and societal obligations of a Prescott woman. My father, the current CEO of the firm, was the personification of its values, stability, prudence, and a deep-seated skepticism of anything that smacked of newness or disruption. They weren't unkind, merely encased in the amber of their heritage, unable to conceive of a world beyond the one they knew. Liana has a wonderfully logical mind, my father would remark at subdued holiday gatherings, his hand resting on my shoulder with a gentle, proprietary weight. She'll be a great asset to the estate planning division after she graduates. It never seemed to matter that I found estate law as thrilling as watching paint dry. Then there was my cousin, Victoria, Uncle Harrison's daughter. 2 years my senior, she was the family's crown jewel, groomed from birth to be the first female CEO of Prescott and Finch. While I was hiding in my room learning to write my first lines of Python, Victoria was shadowing analysts at the firm, her summers spent learning the intricate dance of old money networking. Victoria just secured the Lowell Family Trust. Uncle Harrison would announce at dinner, his chest puffed with pride. A 4-generation relationship, preserved for the next generation. That's the Prescott way. Uncle Harrison, my father's younger brother and a senior partner at the firm, viewed my interests with a kind of weary disdain. He and my father shared a sibling bond, but it was latticed with a quiet, lifelong competition. He saw me as a flaw in the family's otherwise impeccable tapestry. "Such a shame Liana doesn't have Victoria's focus," he'd confide in my father, his voice just loud enough to carry across the drawing room. All that intelligence frittered away on those digital trinkets. My grandparents represented the two poles of the Prescott legacy. Grandfather Julian, the patriarch, would watch me with a quiet, inscrutable curiosity when I tried to explain the concept of an algorithm using sugar cubes on the dining table. He rarely spoke on the matter, but sometimes a flicker of something not quite understanding, but perhaps recognition, would cross his eyes. Grandmother Camilla, on the other hand, was the arbiter of all things proper. "Liana, dearest," she would say, her hand gently correcting my posture. A Prescott woman carries herself with a certain quiet dignity. This obsession with machines is rather loud. But it was Aunt Cordelia, who had married Uncle Harrison, who was the most vocal critic. Having come from a family with slightly less pedigree, she guarded the Prescott traditions with the ferocity of a convert. My fascination with technology was, to her, a personal insult. "Computers are so terribly middle-class, Liana," she'd sniff. "Fleeting fads. Real, lasting value is built on trust and relationships, not on wires and screens." Our biannual family dinners were the stage for these little dramas, a formal accounting of each member's contribution to the family's prestige. I remember one dinner when I was 13, flushed with pride after winning a local coding competition for a simple organizational app I'd designed. "How novel," Aunt Cordelia had commented, her smile a perfect, bloodless crescent. "But do make sure you're keeping up with your French lessons. A cultured mind is a woman's greatest asset." By 17, I was building more complex programs, fascinated by the elegant logic of cybersecurity. These achievements were treated as quaint eccentricities. Liana won another one of her computer awards, my mother might say, her voice betraying a hint of confusion before she'd pivot. "And she's doing beautifully in her macroeconomics class as well." The vast, leather-bound library in our home contained volumes on maritime law and Renaissance art, but not a single book on computer science. The laptop I'd saved for and bought myself was my secret portal to another world, a world where my passions weren't a curiosity, but a burgeoning industry. The family's message was unspoken but clear. Technology was a phase, a hobby. Real Prescotts dealt with inheritances, not innovations. When I chose the University of Texas at Austin for its top-tier computer science program, it was an act of quiet rebellion. My parents only acquiesced because of its respected business school, convinced I would eventually come to my senses and transfer majors. The 3,000 miles between Boston and Austin felt like a different galaxy. For the first time, I could breathe. The person who taught me how to truly inhale that new air was Professor Lena Petrova. After one of her lectures on cryptographic systems, I approached her with a flurry of questions that went far beyond the curriculum. She listened patiently, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. "You don't just see the code, Liana," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "You see the philosophy behind it. You see it as a language for trust." She became the mentor I never knew I needed, connecting me with a world of driven, brilliant people who cared more about the elegance of your solution than the age of your surname. "Your family name can get you a table at the best restaurant in Boston," Lena told me once over coffee. "But in this world, it's what you build that gets you a seat at the table." My first attempt at a startup, a platform for ethically sourced data analytics, was a resounding failure. I was too idealistic, my technical solution elegant, but my business plan a mess. I burned through my small savings and crawled back to my tiny apartment near campus, heartbroken. When I called home, my Uncle Harrison's voice was heavy with a sorrow that felt suspiciously like satisfaction. "This is precisely why we stick to what we know, Liana. Come home. Your father has a place for you at the firm." Enough of this Austin adventure. The next few months were a gray fog. I stayed in Austin, working a menial data entry job to pay rent, the shame a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. I felt adrift, the taunts of my family echoing in my head. Maybe they were right. The breakthrough didn't come in a flash of lightning, but in a slow, dawning realization. It was sparked by a news article about a major European bank suffering a massive data breach, losing millions through a sophisticated fraud scheme. The bank's official statement was full of corporate jargon, but I could read between the lines. Their security was archaic, a digital version of a rusty padlock on a vault door. It hit me then. My two worlds, the staid, trust-obsessed world of Prescott and Finch and the dynamic, ever-evolving world of cybersecurity, were not in opposition. They were two halves of a whole. I understood the deep-seated fears of the financial elite and the technological solutions they were too proud or too ignorant to seek. I didn't sleep for a week. I sketched out the architecture for a new kind of security platform, one that didn't just react to threats, but anticipated them. It would use a self-teaching AI to understand the very DNA of a financial transaction, spotting anomalies with a precision that human-led systems couldn't match. I called it Aegis Ledger. With a fire I hadn't felt in years, I found my team. They were brilliant outcasts, just like me, a self-taught coder named Leo who dropped out of MIT because he found it too slow, a data scientist named Sophia whose thick accent and unconventional background had gotten her passed over by every major tech firm, and a user experience designer named Maya who had been fired for being too disruptive. From my cramped apartment, using second-hand servers and the last of my credit, we built the first prototype. My family, meanwhile, thought I was licking my wounds and considering my options. Our breakthrough came when I managed to get a 10-minute meeting with Ronan Doyle, a venture capitalist known for his gruff demeanor and uncanny eye for talent. He listened to my pitch, his face unreadable. "You're a Prescott of Boston," he said, his Irish accent still thick. "What in God's name are you doing in a sweaty Austin apartment trying to start a company?" "Because my family's world is built on trust," I replied, my voice steady. "But they've forgotten how to build the walls that protect it." "I haven't." He stared at me for a long moment, then a slow grin spread across his face. He funded our seed round that afternoon. I made a critical decision early on. I became LP Prescott in all professional correspondence. It wasn't a lie, but a shield. It allowed Aegis Ledger to be judged on its own merits, free from the assumptions and prejudices my full name would invite. It also kept my secret safe. Our series of funding round closed at $22 million. I celebrated with my team over cheap pizza and beer. The same night, I listened to my mother on the phone lamenting my lack of direction during another family dinner. I just smiled and told her I was working on a project. Aegis Ledger's growth was explosive. Major investment banks, initially skeptical, began quietly adopting our system after we discreetly thwarted attacks they never even knew were happening. Our team grew from 4 to 50, then to 500. We moved from my apartment to a shared workspace, then to our own sleek, minimalist office tower in downtown Austin. I maintained my privacy, sending Leo or Sophia to accept industry awards and keeping my photo off the company website. The legend of the mysterious, low-profile founder of Aegis Ledger began to grow. The call from Forbes came 3 years after that sleepless week of creation. A tenacious reporter had connected the dots between LP Prescott and the Prescott family of Boston. "We want to do a cover story," she said. "The hidden genius who built the new fortress of finance." I hesitated, the conditioning of a lifetime screaming at me to decline. But then I thought of the condescending smiles, the dismissive remarks, the quiet disappointment. It was time. "I'll do it," I said. "On one condition. You use my full name. Liana Prescott. All of it." The photo shoot was in our Austin office, the sprawling city lights behind me. I wore a simple gray dress and boots, not the string of pearls and sensible heels of a Prescott woman. The headline they chose sent a shiver down my spine. Liana Prescott, the blue blood rebel who built a $3 billion fortress for Wall Street. The issue was scheduled to be released the day after our biannual family dinner. I drove my rented hybrid sedan, a deliberately modest choice, through the gaslit, cobblestone square and parked in front of the familiar black door with its gleaming brass knocker. Giles, our family's butler for as long as I could remember, opened it before I could knock. His face, usually a mask of professional calm, held a flicker of genuine warmth. "Miss Liana," he said, taking my coat. "The family is in the library." I smoothed down my silk dress, a deep sapphire blue that felt like a quiet rebellion in a house of neutrals, and inhaled the familiar scent of old books and beeswax. The library doors were open, a silent invitation to my own trial. "Liana, darling," my mother greeted me, her kiss a light brush on my cheek. Her pearls gleamed in the soft lamplight. We were worried. The traffic from the airport must have been dreadful. She assumed I'd flown in from some nebulous, unemployed existence. Something like that, I murmured. My father, standing by the unlit fireplace with a glass of sherry, gave me a curt nod. Good to see you, Liana. Uncle Harrison was less subtle. Victoria was just telling us about the new philanthropy initiative she's heading. $100 million fund. Prescott and Finch giving back. He glanced at me. Heard you're still in Austin. Enjoying the climate. It has its moments, I said. Victoria approached, a vision of tailored elegance in a cream-colored cashmere dress. Her engagement ring, a diamond the size of a small quail's egg, sparkled as she gave me an air kiss. Liana, it's been too long. You missed the Preservation Society gala. It was divine. Her smile was perfectly polite, yet held the faint, unassailable confidence of someone who has never had to question her place in the world. I was just promoted to Senior Vice President of Private Wealth. Youngest in the firm's history. Congratulations, Victoria, I said, and I meant it. Her path was not mine, but I could respect her dedication to it. She's a true Prescott, Uncle Harrison boomed, carrying the torch. My grandmother, Camilla, glided towards me, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She took my hands in her cool, dry ones. Liana, she said, her voice a soft, melodic sigh of disappointment. You look well. But are you any closer to finding a purpose? I think so, grandmother. Her gentle frown was her only reply. Across the room, my grandfather Julian caught my eye and gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was the one gesture that gave me strength. Giles announced dinner at precisely 7:30, and we proceeded to the formal dining room. The long mahogany table was a polished ocean, reflecting the flickering candles of the silver candelabra. I was seated in my usual spot, between Aunt Cordelia and Victoria, a perfect crossfire of judgment. The market is volatile, but our conservative strategy is a comfort to our clients. My father began as the first course, a chilled cucumber soup, was served. These tech stocks all sizzle and no steak. It's an unsustainable bubble. It's the discipline, Uncle Harrison added, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. These West Coast cowboys think they can reinvent the wheel. They don't understand that wealth isn't created, it's stewarded. He looked directly at me. I focused on the delicate swirl of cream in my soup. Liana, my mother said, her voice a little too bright. Why don't you tell everyone what you've been up to? The conversation stopped. Every pair of eyes turned to me. It was the moment I always dreaded, the polite but pointed interrogation of my perceived aimlessness. I'm working on a project in the financial technology sector, I said, my voice even. Oh, that little company that didn't quite work out? Aunt Cordelia asked, her sympathy as thin as a wafer. I do hope you didn't lose too much of your savings, dear. No, this is something new. What's it called? Uncle Harrison pressed. Is it a publicly traded company? Anyone we might know? It's a private venture, I deflected. Victoria chimed in smoothly. Actually, the firm is looking into some fintech partnerships. Mostly for back-office efficiency, of course. We'd never replace the human element of trust. Precisely, Aunt Cordelia affirmed. Technology is a servant, not a master. The conversation moved on, a river flowing around the inconvenient stone of my presence. I ate my pan-seared scallops in silence. Liana was always such a creative child, my mother offered during a lull, as if excusing me. She just sees the world differently. At 28, I was managing a portfolio of over $200 million, Uncle Harrison noted. It's about applying oneself. The world has changed, Harrison, my grandfather said, his voice quiet but resonant. Principles are principles, Father, Aunt Cordelia retorted. As Giles was clearing the main course plates, she turned her full, formidable attention to me. Her diamond earrings glittered as she leaned in. Still finding yourself, dear? She asked, her voice laced with that familiar, cutting pity. At your age, a woman should have some sense of her station in life. It's concerning. The table was silent, everyone waiting for my fumbling, inadequate response. It was the exact scene that had played out in my nightmares for years. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water. I wouldn't say I'm lost, Aunt Cordelia. Oh! She arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. And what would you call it? A sabbatical? An artistic retreat? Or are we still calling it a computer hobby? Before I could form a reply, Giles entered the room, his posture even more ramrod straight than usual. He held a silver salver, a silent apology for the interruption. "Pardon me," he said, his voice calm. "But Mr. Prescott's advance copy of tomorrow's Forbes has just arrived by courier. He asked that it be brought to him immediately." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The timing was so absurdly, poetically perfect it felt scripted. Giles presented the tray to my father. The magazine was face down, its glossy cover hidden. My father picked it up with a distracted air, still engaged in his previous thought. "Thank you, Giles." As I was saying, the key to long-term growth is risk aversion. He flipped the magazine over. And he stopped. The words caught in his throat. He stared at the cover, his face a canvas of utter confusion. The silence stretched, becoming heavy and thick. "Edward," my mother asked, her voice laced with concern. "What is it?" My father's hand was trembling slightly. He couldn't speak. He simply, slowly, turned the magazine around so the entire table could see. There I was, leaning against a window with the Austin skyline blazing behind me, a confident, serene smile on my face. And above me, in bold, white letters, the headline, "Liana Prescott, the blue blood rebel who built a $3 billion fortress for Wall Street." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. My mother's wine glass tilted, spilling red across the pristine white tablecloth like a wound. Uncle Harrison snatched the magazine from my father's nerveless grasp. This is a prank," he stammered, his eyes darting from my face on the cover to my face across the table. Victoria leaned over his shoulder, her complexion ashen. "Aegis Ledger," she breathed. "Your LP Prescott." The LP Prescott. Grandmother Camilla's hand flew to her chest. "Liana, what is the meaning of this?" Aunt Cordelia's mouth was agape, her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. My father finally found his voice, a strained whisper. "Is this real?" I looked at each of them, at the tableau of shock and disbelief. 3 years of silence, of being underestimated, of building my world in the shadows, had led to this single, breathtaking moment. "Yes," I said, and my voice was clearer and stronger than I had ever heard it in this house. "It's real. The magazine comes out tomorrow. Aegis Ledger is my company. I founded it 3 years ago." Aegis Ledger, my father repeated, the name foreign on his tongue. "The firm that Sterling Trust just signed a 9-figure contract with? That Aegis Ledger." I nodded. "And about 20 other financial institutions you'd recognize. Our last valuation was $3.5 billion. My mother's hand fluttered at her throat. "Billion? With a B." Uncle Harrison's face was a storm of conflicting emotions. "And you own it?" "I'm the majority shareholder," I confirmed. 58%. "So while we thought," Grandmother Camilla began, her voice trembling slightly, "while we thought you were drifting, you were building an empire?" "Yes." "But why, Liana?" my mother cried, the hurt plain in her eyes. "Why wouldn't you tell us? We're your family." I met her gaze, and then looked around the table at the people who had defined my world for so long. "Be honest, Mother," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "If I had come to you 3 years ago and said I was going to turn down a place at the firm to start a cybersecurity company in Austin, what would you have done? What would any of you have done?" The silence was my answer. Then, to everyone's astonishment, my grandfather Julian began to chuckle. It started as a low rumble in his chest and grew into a full, rich laugh that seemed to shake the very dust from the damask curtains. "Brilliant," he roared, slapping his hand on the table. Absolutely brilliant. He lifted his water goblet towards me. A true Prescott, after all. Not by following the path, but by building her own road. The dam of silence broke. A torrent of questions flooded the room. How did you? When did you? Why didn't you say? What does it do? I held up a hand, and to my own surprise, the room fell quiet. The balance of power had just shifted, permanently and seismically. I will answer every question you have, I said. But I want you to understand something first. I didn't do this to spite you. I didn't do it for your approval. I did it because I saw a problem that needed solving, and I knew I was the person to solve it. My father sank back into his chair, running a hand over his face. He looked at me with a dawning expression of awe, confusion, and a profound, bottomless regret. We have a great deal to discuss. Yes, I said, feeling a sense of calm settle over me for the first time. We do. The rest of the dinner was forgotten. Giles and the staff cleared the untouched desserts with quiet efficiency as the family migrated to the library, the Forbes magazine now the center of gravity, passed from one stunned set of hands to another. It says here your AI can predict fraud with a 99.97% accuracy rate, Uncle Harrison read aloud, his voice stripped of its usual booming confidence. That's theoretically impossible. Not when you teach the machine to recognize the patterns of trust instead of just the signatures of deceit, I explained, finding it surprisingly easy to talk about my work with them now that the pretense was gone. It's a different philosophy of security. My father paced in front of the cold fireplace, looking at me as if I were a stranger he'd just met. You realize this changes everything. The entire industry will have to adapt or be left behind. That was the plan, I said with a small smile. I always said you had a sharp mind, Uncle Harrison declared, a stunning piece of revisionist history. I just assumed you'd apply it to a state law. Of course, technology is simply another kind of asset management, when you think about it. I let the comment pass without correction. His attempt to fit my achievement into a box he understood was, in its own way, a concession. Victoria sat on the ottoman, the magazine open in her lap. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. Last year, at the charity auction, I spent 20 minutes telling you about a new municipal bond we were offering. I was talking to the founder of Aegis Ledger. You were, I said softly. A faint blush colored her cheeks. I must have sounded like such an amateur. You sounded proud of your work, I told her. And you should be. My mother sat beside me on the sofa, her hand hovering near my arm as if she wanted to touch me but wasn't sure how. I still don't understand the secrecy, Liana. We could have helped. Your father has connections. That's exactly why, I said, meeting her gaze. I needed to do this without the Prescott name opening doors. I needed to know if Aegis Ledger could stand on its own. I needed to know if I could. The room grew quiet again as they absorbed this. The idea of intentionally refusing the privilege they had spent their lives cultivating was utterly alien. Aunt Cordelia, who had been speechless for a record-breaking length of time, finally found her voice. Well, I always knew Liana had a unique perspective, she offered, trying to find her footing on the new terrain. I was merely encouraging her to find a practical outlet. I gave her a gentle smile. Your encouragement was very motivating, Aunt Cordelia. The subtle barb landed, and she had the grace to look away. It was then that Giles appeared, his discretion impeccable. Forgive me, Miss Liana, he said, his voice holding a new note of deference. But your chief technical officer is on the line. He said it was important. I excused myself, stepping into the hallway. Leo? Is everything okay? Better than okay, his excited voice crackled through the phone. The moment the Forbes article leaked online an hour ago, our servers lit up. We've had inquiries from the top 3 banks in Asia and a consortium in Dubai. Liana, this is massive. I leaned against the cool wall, a slow smile spreading across my face. I know. Handle the inquiries. I'll be back in Austin tomorrow. When I returned to the library, My father was holding the phone, his face pale. That was Robert Finch, he said, naming the Finch of Prescott and Finch, a man of almost mythical status in our family. He saw the article. He wants a meeting. With you. Uncle Harrison's eyes lit up with a familiar, predatory gleam. This is it. The perfect synergy. We'll acquire Aegis Ledger, bring it into the fold. A new technology division, headed by you. It will revitalize the firm. This was the moment of truth, the test of my newfound strength. Thank you for the offer, Uncle Harrison, I said calmly and clearly. But Aegis Ledger is not for sale. And it will not be absorbed into Prescott and Finch. We can discuss a client relationship, but my company remains independent. The shock in the room was palpable. My refusal was not just a business decision, it was a declaration of independence from the family's entire way of life. But, you're a Prescott, my father stammered. Your legacy is here. I'm building my own legacy, I replied. One that honors the Prescott principle of trust by actually securing it for the 21st century. Later that evening, after the family had dispersed into stunned silence, my grandfather found me on the small balcony overlooking the sleeping garden. The air was crisp and cold. I tried something similar once, he said into the darkness. I turned to him, startled. What do you mean? In 1968, he said, his voice wistful. I wanted to use early mainframe computers to create a predictive model for market fluctuations. My father, your great-grandfather, told me I was a fool chasing fantasies. He said a Prescott's job was to manage wealth, not to gamble on machines. I stared at him, speechless. It was my biggest failure, he continued, and my deepest regret. I let him convince me my vision was worthless. I came back to the firm, towed the line, and built a successful life I was never truly passionate about. He turned to look at me, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. You didn't make the same mistake. You didn't let us break your spirit. I've been following your company's progress for over a year. You knew. He smiled. LP Prescott was not a difficult code to crack for a man who held you as a baby. I said nothing because this was your fight to win. And you have, my dear girl. You have. He placed his frail, papery hand on my arm. Legacy isn't about preserving the past, Liana. It's about having the courage to build a future worthy of it. You've done that. The next morning, the house was quiet, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Victoria found me in the breakfast room, a rare moment alone. I read the whole article online, she said, not meeting my eye. They called you a visionary. They're prone to hyperbole, I said. No, she said, finally looking at me. They're not. All my life, I've been following the map. I never once thought to question if there was a better destination. She took a deep breath. Last night, I told my father I'm going to start a new division at the firm. An internal venture fund for fintech startups. I want to find the next Aegis Ledger, not be left behind by it. I felt a genuine warmth spread through my chest. That's a brilliant idea, Victoria. Maybe, she said with a wry smile. Or maybe I'll finally get to have my own spectacular failure. Either way, it will be mine. Before I left for the airport, my father stopped me in the entryway. He looked tired, but the confusion in his eyes had been replaced by a dawning respect. I owe you an apology, Liana, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We were so busy trying to make you into a reflection of ourselves that we failed to see the remarkable person you were becoming. My mother joined him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. We'd like to visit you in Austin, she said. We'd like to see what you've built. To understand. I'd like that, I said, and for the first time, the words felt true. I'd like that very much. As my car pulled away from the house on Louisburg Square, I looked back at the stately brick facade, a symbol of a world I had finally broken free from, not through anger or rebellion, but through the quiet, steady work of building my own. The approval I had craved for so long had finally been given, but I realized in that moment that it no longer held the power it once did. The validation I truly needed, I had already given to myself, one line of code at a time. My journey hadn't been about proving them wrong. It had been about proving to myself that I was right. What secret dream are you holding on to? What path are you forging for yourself, away from the eyes of those who might not understand? Share your story in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, I hope you'll subscribe and join our community of quiet builders and gentle rebels. Remember that the most important belief to cultivate is your belief in yourself. Thank you for being a part of my story today. I'll see you in the next one.